So this section is on pressing. Now obviously pressing can come in two major forms, pressing horizontally and pressing vertically. Now most people don't have a big problem when it comes to pressing horizontally, but there's still things that we're going to use to improve that quality. What we're really going to emphasize is pushing vertically. There's a couple of reasons for that. The most important is obviously we want to establish good upper body mobility and stability. That means stability in the lower body and the core while having mobility in the upper body. So a lot of people, run into the problem with bad shoulders and other issues when it comes to pressing overhead. In reality, a lot of these issues are simply a byproduct of not learning how to create stability to allow mobility in the upper body. So those of you that saw our shoulder restoration course may be familiar that we add in ultimate sandbag here, and the reason we do so is the hand tension. So one thing a lot of people do with our drills is go, can I use something else? And if again you're not integrating these proper concepts, you're not going to get the same impact upon the movement. One of the things that you'll find is there's many exercises that look similar, but you don't get the same result because the details dictate everything. So just actually grabbing onto the ultimate sandbag itself and trying to actually pull it apart actually creates a greater tension down that chain of lat and core, so we're going to amplify that connection. Now if she moves her feet back, see how she still can keep her elbows in close to her body, but keep the forearms going out, and I should see no saggy bag. Those of you that have done our pelvic control course know that's a key concept, that we should see no saggy bag, and relax Jessica, when we're doing these motions. So what we can do is, again, use that as an avenue to build volume. 10 seconds, 15 seconds of work, 5-second break. Creating a lot of tension is quite fatiguing, so you want to make sure that we, again, progress people adequately over time. So once we get in that position and we have that baseline, then we can start adding a challenge of obviously we can move her back, that's one option, or we can extend the lever arm in the upper body. So creating that tension again, she's going to create tension down in the feet and the forearms. She's going to slowly try to extend the bag out above her as she pulls apart. And the reason I really want you guys to see this as she pulls her elbows in nice and hard is basically this looks like the beginnings of a really good overhead press. Nice job, Jess. And you see how she doesn't dump in her pelvis if she was going to do so, and relax. We would have to cue her to using her feet. Okay? So if you see the pelvis collapsing, diving in into the movement, usually people have lost ground tension. Obviously, if you're cueing that and they still can't do it, you just may not have them at the appropriate angle. You may have to bring them a little bit more vertical. But this is a great way to introduce that concept, because when she's pressing overhead, she's actually pushing down, creating tension in her hands and her elbows and her lats to press the weight up. Pressing the weight overhead has far less to do with you using your shoulders to push overhead than it does creating proper tension foundation from the ground up, and almost your arms are just an extension of everything. So in a moment, we're going to show you how we can amplify this by giving her a little bit more challenge by independently holding the handles and giving a little bit more feedback to her body. All right, so now, again, small progressions that create big outcomes. So instead of trying to do a variety of things just for novelty's sake, what you see by building progression is we have a ton of variation, and you can try these different variations and see if your client is prepared to do them well. Obviously, if they struggle with it, you know where to bring them back to. But again, you could use probably any of these different sequences during the course of a week, just one of them, and it's going to feel like a brand new exercise to your client, but you're simply just adding another layer to the quality of the movements that learning and the concepts that they're building. So if we take away the ultimate sandbag and we don't allow her to be in her forearms anymore, just like we would go from the ground to a push-up position, we're going to get her hands on palm the handles. And what's great here is by having, an ability to create that tension here, wrist, we're number one eliminating any of that concern with people in their wrists. Now, we'll go over as we get to the ground, a lot of the wrist issues is a ground engagement issue. But to remove that apprehension from your client, because again, if people think something's going to hurt, they're not going to be apt to do it, we can teach that nice straight wrist, we can create that tension, and we teach them how to create that packing in their lats. Now, one thing that's especially specific to suspension trainers is you'll see a lot of people get in this position. You never want to be in this position because, again, we just detach the lat from the chain. Getting this simple just change activates more of the lat. She's got a stronger and more stable shoulder, and now she's in a position where she can create strength and stability. So obviously we can create that same holds. We can move her back a little bit. And increase the intensity of here, but you see how we have no wing in the scapula. If she were to simply turn her arms out, go and turn your arms out just, you see she actually sinks and she loses tension in that scapula. Simply by rotating in, her brace becomes stronger, her scapula becomes more stable, her grip is nice and strong, so now she's in a safe position that if we want to do something like a push-up, which we will do later, you'll see she's much stronger. So again, understanding the different positional concepts allows you to build progression. From there we can again go into our fallout positions, which we'll do in a second, where she extends her arms forward. Now when she does so we will see a rotation here. That's because it's very hard to maintain that position here for a lot of people. If you do so, a lot of people, if you do have pain in the shoulder, can try a more neutral position. Something we're going to talk about when we press over better in a neutral hand position, where people get in trouble with their shoulders when they go into external rotation of that shoulder joint. So if Jessica goes back in that position and she does a little fallout, keeping that plank, keeping tension in the feet, nice, and then pulls in by pushing through the feet and rotating the arms so she's pulling herself with the lat, she's going to feel much stronger. Nice, Jessica. And some of you may be asking, why don't we do this on the ground? Do we allow her to do this from her knees? My preference would be to change her body angle rather than bring her down her knees. The reason being is once you bend the knees, you break that kinetic chain in the lower body a little bit, and while it's still plausible to get the same type of connection, it's actually much harder to engage. By keeping the legs straight, you're going to make it easier for them to understand how to create the appropriate tension. So I'd rather you change the length of the strap, get them in a different body position, than get them upon their knees. Now, what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to start building, again, thinking of that press and work on more scapular stability and sort of change the way you think about some familiar exercises. On over, we're going to start working some more specific scapular stability. We're also going to work a little bit in that more pressing motion. It should be noted that, again, I want to remind you guys, when we did the fallouts with the ultimate sandbag, when we did the fallouts with the handles on the straps, those are both overhead presses. We're not coming necessarily directly overhead yet, but you see how we're building towards that pattern where we have that nice stable plank as we go overhead. One of the key concepts about going overhead is that shoulder motion. Either or, horizontal or vertical, we want to have balance upon the two. However, as I mentioned in the introduction, more people have issues in going overhead or vertically than they do horizontally. So, what we're going to do is we're going to take the concept of a wall slide. So if everyone knows a wall slide, you get close to a wall. You try to slide your hands in contact with the wall as you move up and down. The idea is that you get a lot of that scapular control, you get feedback of the wall. The problem with that is, again, we're not most people. Again, the cueing tends to be all in the upper body, very little to what's happening with my feet, my pelvis, my core, my lats in that motion. And even if I do that, even if I tell people to grab the ground, create that tension, create that stable plank, and then wall slide, it's better, but again, I'm not getting enough feedback with my upper body. And a lot of people, the more feedback initially, especially, the better the result you'll get and the more freedom of motion. Remember, it's Sherrington's law. If I create more tension in my hands or my feet, I'll get a greater response upon the corresponding limbs and area. So if I really want to get that scapular stability, I want to integrate my hands as much as I can or get feedback upon that upper body. So there's two things we're going to do. So I can turn away from the unit now, and by placing my hands upon the foot straps, I can now create tension against the handles. And as soon as I do that, I can feel the upper back muscles really firing off. Versus, I'm hoping that happens when I go here, and that's what's going to be creating that scapular stability, is that tension. The other nice part is I can more easily create that plank. So remember, whenever I'm in a position with the suspension unit, the nice thing about using them is that ability to create a constant plank. That again, the cueing has to be from the feet up. And I can be very I can gradate this very easily by just changing my body angle. So when you're starting this, start very conservatively at a higher angle with your body. And I'm going to start where I have tension to begin the motion, and I'm creating ground tension in my feet. So when I come up, I'm creating tension, pulling back, pulling back, pulling back overhead, but I'm still grabbing the ground with my feet, and then I'm pulling my elbows into my ribs as I create tension into those handles. So again, my elbows should finish in close to my body, both at the start, at the end. Now, external position for the shoulder is probably the most challenging for most people. So again, we want to make sure that they don't feel any pain when they're doing this motion. If they feel weakness, that's one thing. But even if people traditionally had pain in their shoulder, when they have feedback in the hands and feet, let me do this again. Tension, there's no slack in the straps. I'm in between the handles, creating tension in the ground. I don't feel any discomfort in my shoulders. I feel a lot of the muscles on my upper back and those scapular stabilizers creating that tension, getting that feedback, and taking upon the load. Now, if you do run into a situation where someone's just finding way too much discomfort, something you might want to try is taking a mini band. And again, a little bit of weight goes a long ways. And again, bands, as you see through this program, will be a great avenue to create feedback. So this I don't consider as good because, again, one of the things that we want to teach is that plank. So you have to have a little bit more body awareness. But again, I'm going to create tension in my feet first. I want to create that foundation for my glutes get tight. I'm going to create tension in the band, so I want to be in that position. So now I can use the band tension as a feedback tool to come overhead. Notice how my ribs are staying down in the motion, and my elbows really are not flaring away. The expansion of the rib cage is really a byproduct of losing tension in the feet. As you guys have read about in the manual, if I relax my feet and I try to lift my ribs, it's quite easy to do. However, if I grab the ground with my feet, what you'll feel is that little movement of your pelvis that creates a locking mechanism. Think of it as the true activation of your core. So if you create that tension with your feet and then do this motion, then what you're having is the core locks down. Now it's almost impossible for me to elevate my ribs. I want you to appreciate some of these seem like very simple things is when you have multiple parts of the body moving and you're making people cognizant of the upper body and the lower body at the same time, that's a lot of things going on for most people. So again, one of the things we can do is anytime we have an opportunity to provide feedback to them, let's take advantage of that because that'll create a better result. So again, we're not trying to add more pieces of equipment to make this more extensive to you. We're adding equipment when it is more beneficial. And these are very simple tools that allow the client to understand intrinsic feedback to the external stimulus. Now, for those of you that have been following us for a while, you may get tired of hearing about press outs. But again, there's such an important place to start with a lot of these pressing drills. And for those of you that are new to this, one of the biggest things to understand is when we do a press out, it's not a chest exercise. What we are doing is we're trying to teach how to push down the ground to create a press in the upper body. So really it's about, again, doing the same connections we've been talking about. How do we connect the lower body, core, and last to the shoulder girdle and the hands? So again, one of the important things to look at is some of the details that we're going to cover. So again, many of you may think, oh, I can press out anything. I can press out dumbbell, kettlebell, medicine ball. I get asked this all the time. And one of my hopes with this program specifically, with using the lift certification, is that you see we're very deliberate about using the right tool for the right job. That again, we could easily have you just press anything, but we're all about using the best tool to accomplish the goals that we're trying to achieve. So a couple of things that you want to understand about the ultimate sandbag and why it's such a great tool for a press out. For one is the pliability of the implement itself. So if Jessica simply, if we just focus upon her trying to pull the bag apart, you see how it instantly engages her lats, her scapular stabilizers. If she just casually holds the weight, she loses a lot of that tension. For a lot of other implements, kettlebell, dumbbell medicine, but you can't create that same tension. And if we want to create these amazing outcomes, we have to make sure we're using the right tools. So again, one of the big things that we're going to be cueing is not just holding the weight, but how we hold the weight. And pulling apart that tension is going to be really integral in getting the most out of this exercise. Now, a lot of times, for those of you that have seen us do press-ups before, we've actually started on the ground. And by no means is that a wrong way to begin this drill, because oftentimes people are going to be using a lighter weight anyways. And when we start in a compromised position, people really have to understand how to use the feet. And we will go over that in a few minutes. But what I want to do is show you guys also something we just don't show enough, is that you can definitely teach this in a standing posture. So if you have someone coming off an injury, an elderly person or someone very deconditioned, please get them in a standing position. In this case, a standing position is going to be the easier position because they have the most ability to integrate the entire body in the exercise. All right, so if you're having people struggle, get them standing. And just like we did before, if we're going to get them standing, give Jessica some tension in her feet by using the band. So again, instantly use that band. Use that band right away. Don't even assume that they know how to do it. And even if they know how to do it, you'll often notice it just makes people better. So a couple of key points with this. We went over the hands already. This is the elbow position. A lot of people, they'll start here, but as soon as we get ready to press, they'll move the bag up, relax chest, they'll move the bag up, and they'll want to press from their chest. So they've just changed the joint angle in their elbow. We want that 90-degree angle, right? So again, it's important to understand that when it feels heavy in the hands, one of the things we have to do is not think about using the arms more, but pushing the ground harder. So elbows in the ribs, nice 90-degree angle. She's engaged with the feet. She's actively pulling apart. Now the cueing is important. I want her to push through her feet, keep her elbows in her ribs, and drive the weight from her chest. So feel a lot of pressure as she's pushing down. So it should almost just feel like the arms are an extension of her pushing her feet down. Let's do a rep it out. And we're in that nice plank position. She's pulling it back in by driving her elbows into her ribs. So again, just as we don't want to be casual about pushing out, we want to be very active pulling back in. So again, you know you did it right when it doesn't feel very heavy in the upper body. So again, if we're seeing any shrugging of the shoulders, we want to make sure we're communicating this correctly, that we're not telling people to push the weight out, because that's not what's happening. We want them to push their feet down. Again, pushing the feet down. She goes at full lockout. You see the creasy elbows are pointing up. She pulls the weight back in. So again, you feel a lot of lat. You feel a lot of core, even glutes, but you shouldn't feel very heavy in the shoulders, definitely not in the upper traps. Okay, so another way we can start progressing the press out and building a little bit more shoulder stability. Obviously, if we have both hands upon the implement, we have a little bit more stability. If we have different weights moving each side, and then we go ahead and have a little bit more shoulder stability because we have to control independently moving weights. And to be honest, like, there's some things I don't like that are very popular, and I always try to give my rationale, and I always try to base things. I give you guys the difference between what the research has shown and what is philosophy by Josh. But having owned a facility for over a decade and working with clients for over 20 years, I can tell you, like, things like bombs up kettlebell work, I'm just not a huge fan of. Again, this is philosophy by Josh. It can be very hard for people to understand how to create that tension. It's very hard for people to progress. It ends up using almost no load for a lot of people, so they're not under actually any load. And if they don't do it correctly and it comes down upon the wrist, it amplifies the thing people hate about kettlebells the most, which is feeling any discomfort in the wrist. That's why I was really excited when Perform Better started creating these lever bells, because I think we can actually create a lot of the same effect in a safer environment, meaning that the whole benefit of a bombs up kettlebell was that grip tension, that grip strength we were building, that Dr. McGill talked about being such a key attribute in shoulder and core stability. So one of the biggest things that people do with being bombs up is trying to create that hand tension, and something that people are just so disconnected from. Most people are so disconnected from using their hands and their feet, and it's going to be the biggest challenge at first. So sometimes if we use implements that demand them use both of these, then we can create these great outcomes. So I'm actually going to use two different sizes of lever bells here, just so you guys can see some different variations. You could obviously do this with the same size, but I'll explain why I'm using two different sizes. Obviously, with a lever bell, the advantage is I can change my grip rather easily. the closer I am to the knob, the easier it is. The further away, the more control I have, and you see that there's more control upon the implement. And the way I control the implement is by creating that grip. So if you see my hand when I grip, how it actually changes the scapular control in my shoulder. So again, unlike a kettlebell, it's not going to plop upon my wrist. If I lose control a little bit, I have time to reacclimate myself, or if I can just come down with a load. So what we're going to do is look at the same things, but now I'm going to have two independently moving weights. There's two ways I can do this. I'm going to use the other weight, I'm going to use the heavier load to create tension upon the opposing side. And the reason I'm going to do that is when you do any type of unilateral work, and we'll talk about this when we do use kettlebells and do different types of ultimate sandbag drills, that there's the demand in that frontal plane. And a lot of times when people go to press something overhead, they collapse in that frontal plane because they don't have that integrity. So the way we can create that integrity is creating that tension upon the opposing side. Now, some people ask me, I'm sure that, hey, can I do this with bands? You can definitely try. I've done this with bands in the past, and the reason I like the lever bells more is because of the tension you can create in the hand that controls the weight, and the weight is actually balancing this way. While there's some instability with the band, the hand and the grip is not as impactful upon using the band. So again, if you can, try to use these lever bells. If you can't, definitely try using a band, but I think you'll be surprised upon the difference. Anyways, so let's get into what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to take up both lever bells, and the heavier one, I'm going to create that tension down, and so I'm going to try to keep that packed as I press this arm out. And you'll see there's a ton of neuromuscular control going on actually both sides. You see the heavier one wants to move as I move here, as I press out that right arm. See, I'm not changing that joint angle though. I'm still trying to press from that belly button area. So again, I'm not coming up here to press the weight out. Something you want to be very careful, again, just like in the ultimate sandbag, when the weight becomes heavy, you don't want people compensating their joint angle. So again, we'll look for those lines pressing straight out. The nice part is, if I find that rather easy, which I generally won't, I mean, this one's only 15 pounds, and holding it for that duration while I'm pressing out this one is quite challenging. I can just change the leverage point. So again, so what I mean is, if I come up, if I go ahead and press this one out, and I'm going to hold it now, as I press this one, this is going to be even more demanding upon my body. But you see the angles I need to take, I have to actively be gripping in my feet for the motion, but you see how I stay out of my traps, the crease of my elbows pointing up. So you have the option of changing where you hold in relationship to the lever bell, but you also have the leverage you can create with the shoulders. It's a great way to take that press out to another level, and just like with the ultimate sandbag, I can move to any body position and do this. You'll be surprised how light loads can be incredibly challenging, but at the same time, we're still working on the same integrity of keeping that plank, using the lats, and pushing down. Just the instability has changed and the patterning has changed a little bit.